Imry Halevi is the Associate Director of Athletics at Harvard University and has left an indelible mark on the world of sports broadcasting. His role in establishing the Ivy League of ESPN network underscores his commitment to innovation. Beyond the mainstream, Halevi fearlessly brings niche sports like sailing and rowing and skiing and more to the forefront, showcasing their unique stories and athletes. Imry, so good to have you here on the show.
Great. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Now, I'm afraid I ask the same question every time. How did you get into this? How did you get started?
I think like most people, accidentally is the answer. When I was in college many years ago, our college opened a new hockey arena. They were very big on hockey. Had a video board at the arena, and they hired an external company to do the video board show for hockey games. But they had many other events, and I was just a sophomore who was interested in technology, who stumbled upon their control room, which I remember the first time I saw it, I was shocked. I couldn't move. I was stunned. In retrospect, it was just a bunch of black and white CRT monitors with one color monitor in the middle for program. And it's like I would be embarrassed to walk into a room like that right now. But back then, I thought I have to get back in here. So I convinced them to just let me play around and figure it out and help them run the video board show for all their other events wherever they didn't hire an external company.
And where did it go from there? How did that turn into where you are now?
So when I was done with Boston University, I went to grad school at Northeastern University, still in the Boston area. And I had a lot of free time. So I emailed this guy I happened to find in the athletic department and said, hey, just came from Boston University. I kind of know how to do video boards. I have some free time if you need help. And he responded and said, actually, we just installed a brand new video board at our hockey arena. God. And no one knows what to do with it. And I said, great, I know how to do video boards. And so I got to start my own team. I got to build out a video board production network at Northeastern. And that's kind of when streaming became a thing. And so they said, well, you're doing the video board show already. Can you figure out streaming? And I said, sure, well, I'll figure it out. And slowly built it from there, not just hockey, but basketball and all these other sports Northeastern had. And then 12 years
ago. What year were you starting to stream?
Streaming, I would say, started around 2009, 2010 for me.
Yeah. And what were you streaming? Because a lot of us that started in about that 2006 to 2010, what software were you using to stream?
Wirecast, I want to say. Telestream's Wirecast.
Yeah, I think a lot of us there was either Wirecast or FMLE. The other one that a lot of us would package stuff up in. So you started doing some of the streams. How did it grow from there?
Well, it was also the start of social media. And so a lot of people were freely commenting on the quality of our streams, which I would be the first to admit they were not great.
They were all rough back then. We had no budget. So anyway, yeah.
Right. But it was great because I was getting like real-time feedback.
Yeah.
And people often ask me, do you have a recording of your first stream, your first show? And I don't, because I forgot to press record. That's how nervous I was. That's how everything was like. And it's probably for the best, because I can't imagine I'd ever want to watch that again.
Yeah.
But, evolved with time and got better. We eventually got one of like the first TriCasters from NewTek. Obviously not HD. I do think it was digital. I think it had SDI inputs, which was like a nice big discovery after the worlds of composite and component. And slowly started building a control room where we could do more and more and not just like a camera into a laptop.
Now tell us, so that's how you got started. What does your typical rig look like now for, first of all, your major sports events? What's your typical pipeline?
Yeah, so let's say football. We have a couple of central control rooms at Harvard, so we use one of those control rooms for a football show. We have between 8 and 9 cameras. The way that they get to our control room varies. We have some on fiber. We have some that are wireless and then go to fiber. We have some that are NDI. I think probably a couple of other things. We have 2 commentators in a press box. We have a wireless sideline reporter. We often have a drone flying over the field. And I'm sure we have other things. Obviously, a couple of channels of replay. We have multiple channels of graphics. And so all of that feeds our central control room. And we split up our control room into two different stations, one in charge of our broadcast, which, the stream, but depending on where it's going, we call it broadcast, and one for the video board show, which uses a lot of the same resources. And we produce both with a different director for each show using the resources.
And what switchers are you using these days?
We're still on new tech stuff, or I guess there is now. So we have whatever top-of-the-line TriCaster switcher they come out with. We just get a few of those. And so we currently have a TC2 Elite for each show.
Now, and how does that, as you start to go, we talked a little bit about the fact that it's not just football, right? There's lots of other sports that you need to cover. How do you make that more compact? Because a lot of times the budgets, the resources, and everything else aren't quite the same as for some of the football games. So how do you handle those productions as well as those backhauls?
Yeah, so we have 42 Division I teams at Harvard, and besides golf, for which we don't have home meets, we produce all the home games for all the sports, which comes out to about 350 events a year. And what I like to tell my team is we don't judge it based on how the public judges it. Football up here and the rest down there. We look at it from a parent point of view. I'm not going to go to a mom and say, I care less about your daughter because she's a fencer and not a women's basketball player. Right. We look at it. Everyone is equal and not necessarily deserving of equal attention and equal production scope, but they need equitable attention. Mm-hmm. They need what their sports needs to succeed. And so we do 99.9% of our productions out of our two control rooms. Again, fencing, water polo, rowing, skiing, or football or basketball. They're out of the same productions, out of the same control rooms. We have fewer cameras, perhaps, for fencing, because I don't know what I would do with 9 cameras for a fencing match. It's just one strip.
But you're still using replay, and you're still doing
replay, still doing everything. We rely very, very heavily on NDI, and so costs for equipment is minimal because our switchers just receive the NDI as is. We don't need to trench and run cabling or anything like that. And during COVID, we have started relying a lot on PTZ cameras. We've installed them in almost all our facilities. And so we can do out of one control room with the same people sitting there, a fencing match or a water polo game, and it doesn't really matter. The PTZ controllers point to whatever facility we need. The control room connects to whatever facility we need. The commentators sit in a commentator booth somewhere, and we change what their monitors show. So it doesn't really matter what sport it is. The setup is very similar, and the costs are pretty minimal because everything is already there. Everything is wired. Everything is connected. You just need someone to talk about the game, and depending on the sport, someone to run cameras and graphics.
Do you ever get any, one of the things we've had, when we build remote productions, a lot of times the commentators don't like to be out of the field. They want to sit on the field or near the field, and we want to put them in a box. Like, I want to put you in a box that makes sense for me. And they were like, well, we want to be on the field. And so how does that tension happen for you?
Only all the time. Yeah. All other times, it's fine. Yes, and it depends a lot on the facility. Some of our we go with historic, not old. A lot of our facilities are historic. Harvard Stadium was built in 1903. And so if there's a press box, if there's really fast internet, if it's weather protected, then sure, we'll set up a couple of Dante commentator stations. We'll make sure there's someone around who can support if needed, and we let the commentators be close to the action. But if not, either because the action is very far away. We talked about rowing, sailing, skiing. Those are not on campus. They're close by, but they're not necessarily on campus. Or if the facilities can support it. Our baseball field is just a baseball field. There's no power. There's no internet. It's just a field. Could we figure out the way to put the commentators there with some bonded cellular complex solution? Sure. But is it more likely to fail? Yes. And do I want to start thinking about tally and return feeds over bonded cellular and the delay? I really don't. And so we forced them. This year we decided specifically for baseball and softball, we're going to put them remote in a booth somewhere. They were very resistant, but we got them really big TVs. They're like 75-inch TVs on the wall. We said one is going to show a multi-view, one is going to show program. You're good. We gave them a telestrator. After the first game, they no longer complained. It was fine. So I think it's just showing that the booth can be a good experience, and that actually at the end of the day, it's better for fans, which is why we're here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, you have all these events. Do you have very many collisions where you have a lot of events happening at the same time?
Yeah. There was that one weekend, I think, in December where we didn't have collisions. But besides that, yeah.
How do you deal with it when so you've got two main stations? How many studios can you turn on to manage the many shows that you may have?
So each control room is split up so that it can do two shows at the same time. Now, if we have a football game, the two shows are football on ESPN and football video board show. But if it's not football, I can do a water polo show and a field hockey show at the same time from the same control room, and it's built so that they don't really get in each other's way. So 4 full productions out of our 2 control rooms. Some of our sports are automated. We have built systems to stream tennis and squash automatically because there are many courts. And so we built something with a lot of blackmagic equipment to make that automated. So those don't really count for us. We also have a mobile setup. We have a nice little TriCaster Mini that we can spin up as needed and set up another show. And if all else fails, we have a couple of trusted laptops with Wirecast still available. We only use it once or twice a year where really things get tight. But typically we try to put everything back in our control rooms, and 4 or 5 things overlapping is normal, but more than that, really overlapping is rare. Usually we'd have like 4 games at the same time in the morning, 4 games at the same time in the evening, and so the control rooms just switch over.
Wow, it's incredible. Now, where do these streams go? What are they? What platforms are they streaming to?
So the Ivy League has a contract with ESPN, so all our productions by default go to ESPN Plus, ESPN's direct-to-consumer platform. We also work with our RSN, our regional sports network, which is NESN, the New England Sports Network, and about 14 of our productions a year also go on NESN. So if you're at a bar in Boston and you see a Harvard hockey game on TV, that's not NESN sending a truck or a crew, it's just our production as is. We switch over to a NESN graphics package and we send it as well. So majority on ESPN Plus, some go on NESN.
And how are you delivering this to ESPN from your control room?
We use high-vision Makito encoders using SRT.
That's great.
Which is pretty reliable.
And we're a bunch of geeks, so we're gonna ask you what comm systems are you using?
Yeah, I'm always trying to calibrate my answers because I don't know.
You can go as deep as you want.
I start glazing over.
Our eyes will most likely not glaze over. So what comm systems are you using?
So we use ClearComm party line systems. We have a dedicated party line system within each of our control rooms, and then we use ClearComm LQ, which takes the party line and puts them over IP, and then we have a complex routing system. So I can say, hey, I'm going to take this channel from this venue and this channel from that venue and connect them like this. We also all have ClearComm Agent IC apps on our phone. So that allows you to remote into the LQ unit. So I can walk around any of our facilities, connect to any of the party lines anywhere, and just talk to people.
So, and to be specific to that, you're using the ClearComm, you're using a matrix? Is that you're using
just party line?
Just party line, okay. And then with the LQ boxes, I believe you get up to 8 channels that you can deliver back to Agent IC. Are you using multiple LQ boxes to supply different?
So we have an LQ in each control room, and then we have mobile LQs. So if I have camera operators out in the field somewhere, and I want them to just use standard ClearComm belt packs and headsets and nothing too special, I have them all connect to one of our mobile LQs so I can route them. And we also have a ClearComm FreeSpeak 2 system for wireless, so like football wireless cameras roaming freely. We use that as well, and then put it on LQ.
Great. And what cameras are you using?
We use JVC cameras almost exclusively. So we have some big JVC 900s, medium 500s, and lots of JVC PTZ cameras.
And how are you what do you mix the audio on?
So we have some mixers by several companies. I grew up on Allen and Heath mixers, so we have a lot of those. We have some PreSonus ones. But really these days, because of Dante, we have a lot to just go straight into our TriCaster. We have something in the middle. We have a Studio Technologies, and a lot of our stuff is Studio Technologies for Dante. So we have a Studio Technologies Dante engine in the middle. So that creates submixes and does return feeds. So if a commentator needs to get a return feed so they can hear themselves and the person next to them, that goes through a Studio Technology mixer first. But then everything just ends up on our TriCaster. We don't bother with another physical mixer. It allows us to see all the sources easily, allows us to mix and create macros for levels. It's simpler for us with Dante.
And are you using the 3-play for the playback, for the replays?
Yeah.
That's great. And you're using the built-in graphics for inside of the TriCaster, or using anything external?
No. So we use a graphic system by a company called AJT, which has been acquired by Daktronics. They create a system called Livebooks. And the Livebook allows us to use the ESPN graphics package. So ESPN develops their graphics package. Well, they develop it for ROS expression and for other platforms. And then they have the people at AJT take it from ROS and build it for their live books. And so we have several live books, all NDI, so they show up on our network, but they're custom built for scoring and supporting sports. That's what they're there for. And so it really helps us out with sports-specific scenarios and calling in insert graphics and everything, things that would be more challenging to do on a TriCaster.
That's great. Chris, you had some questions?
Yeah. So one of the things that really stands out to me about your productions is, and you mentioned it before, is the, for lack of a better term, the lesser sports, the sports that not everyone cares about.
There are no lesser sports.
I as a track and field athlete, that hits home to me. But so what was the first broadcast, you do sailing and crew and skiing that for college athletics seems kind of out there. So what was the first broadcast where someone came to you and said, "Hey, we want to do this," and you had to really think about is that can we even do that? Is that no one's done that before at our level, stuff like that?
Yeah, so we do pride ourselves in broadcasting everything, and some sports are easy to just move over our setup from others. We do women's rugby, which is unusual. Most people don't produce women's rugby. But really, how difficult is it to do it if you're already doing soccer? From a production standpoint, there isn't much of a difference, or football. So that was easy. Things that are really, really different for us, you mentioned sailing. Skiing has been a big thing for us because so we produce skiing, both alpine and Nordic, and they're far away. Alpine we've been doing in Burke, Vermont, which is a mountain in Vermont. And Nordic we do out of Craftsbury, Vermont, which, if you're wondering what's closest to Craftsbury, Vermont, the answer is Canada. And so even cell reception there is a challenge. And you have to think about storytelling, right? You have to think about, even if you get past all the technical hurdles, what's the best way to tell the story of this specific sport? So for alpine, they ski down a mountain, and so you want to, and you can picture this from Winter Olympic stuff, but you want a camera at the start. You want a couple of cameras in the middle. You want a camera at the finish. For Nordic, they do this 5K course in the woods, and so you want a drone following them. You want cameras along the course. You want something at the finish line so you can do interviews. So it's using a lot of our existing equipment and thinking, where would I place everything and where would it make sense for the commentators to be? And graphics, I'm a big graphics guy. And so what kind of graphics help tell the story? You mentioned track and field. So we produce track and field, both indoors and outdoors. And one of the things we do best, I think, is this throwing cage, which, in my opinion, most people really just breeze right through. Say, oh, we'll do the running events. Well, they're really talented athletes throwing heavy things, and we could tell that story. And so what we do is we put a POV camera. We use IDA for those, an IDA POV camera through the fence. There's a chain link fence so that people don't get hurt. We stick it through the fence at eye level. So you can see the athlete right there, 6 feet away, warming up, preparing, really good angle. And then you see them throw it. And then we have these really detailed graphics so that you can see the distance for this throw and the distance for the previous throw. And is this the record for this athlete or not? And who's coming up next? And we don't change cameras. We just, unless it's a big final and we have a wireless camera to show reacts, it's just a POV and graphics and commentators. That's it. It's a one camera show. And we have gotten so many positive remarks from this. How are you doing this? How are you achieving it? What's the cost? Well, it's a POV camera and a microphone. The cost is minimal, but it's not what I would do for any other sport. We just had to sit down and think, what's the best for this? Because a lot of people overproduce for no reason, just to show that they have the equipment. And if it doesn't make sense for the sport, you're doing a disservice to everyone.
And so it's really for all of these different sports. How many sports again did you say that you cover? How many different sports?
40 teams. Some of them are a men and women kind of thing, but we have 42 teams. We don't do the golf, and so 40 teams out of our 42.
And so for each one of those, you're really handcrafting a solution for that sport that makes the most sense.
Yeah, and it's challenging because some sports, there's a general knowledge in the population about how to cover the sport, right? You say baseball. Okay, well, I can picture that. I see it on TV. You say fencing, you say, I'm going to give it some thought, because what makes sense for fencing? And so talking to these coaches really, really helps in saying, in your ideal world, how would you tell the story of fencing? Or swimming and diving, same. You have it in the Olympics, but we don't have the resources to do the Olympics. And so how do you tell the story of swimming and diving so that viewers who are novices and viewers who are swimming experts both get something out of it? It's interesting. It's a lot of learning.
So you mentioned there's usually a general knowledge of how a sport is expected to be broadcast. And as a track and field athlete, I can tell you there absolutely is. And track and field athletes completely disagree with it. So how do you how do you manage that? Like, this is how it's always done versus this is maybe a better way to do it that may like for the throwing, like that is not something that you would see on NBC because it's not a running event. So,
right. I think track and field is a great example. Also swimming and diving. If you watch one of our swimming broadcasts, you'll see we have a graphic on the screen at all times that has all the information. Everyone in every lane, their split time, their total time so far, the record for the meet, the record for the pool, everything. And it's a lot. I mean, it doesn't take up a lot of the screen. We shape it nicely, but it's a lot. And it's because of feedback we got from swimmers and swim coaches saying, this drives us crazy at the Olympics because we need more information. And so we try to balance it. We don't try to overwhelm people. But really, if you follow a swim meet and all you have is the current time, I can't get lots out of it. And same with track and field as well, like showing more information, historical information, or where am I? Like, does each person get 3 throws, 4 throws? Have they already done their throws? Like, where am I assuming, because it's streaming, and so people aren't sitting there from start to finish. They're just going to check in. Can you give them all the information they need in the first 3 seconds so they can decide if they want to keep watching or not?
For like the things that are 5 kilometers and so on and so forth, how do you manage telemetry of the runners themselves? Like, how do you know where they are?
So they all have like their numbers, their bib numbers, and the bib numbers have RF chips in them. So as they pass specific points, we get split times of them passing those points.
And there's not really any information. So for the throwing ones, for instance, one of the things I know that NCAA is working on is basketballs with sensors in them so that they can see them. Have you guys experimented with that at all?
We have not. That would be great. I would support that. But changing the actual playing equipment, I think I would get in trouble for if I did that.
Yeah, it seems like it's on the early phase of it's hard to get over that. But I think that some teams are starting to play with the idea, and I guess it's it took 5 years to get the basketball to bounce correctly, so that it feels that it behaves exactly like a basketball, except that it has.
Right, and some sports are better. Like at rowing, the Cambridge and Oxford in England just had their big race probably a month ago, and they had these huge monstrous towers behind the coxswain with multiple cameras so they can see every single person who's rowing and then transmit it back to the shore. It made for a really good broadcast, but it added significant weight to one side of the boat. And they got the coaches to agree to it because everyone was doing it. Every single boat on the race had the same extra weight, and so they were fine with it. And that's what we always need to do. If we change something, we have to change it for everyone. And so getting all the conferences, all the teams to agree, I think is the next step.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
We have a bunch of questions stacking up, so we're going to jump into those questions. Let's go to the questions.
All right, first question here for the second hour is Annie Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. What are your thoughts on the future of remote control rooms and remote technical directing?
I am for it. I think the question is, what are we talking about when we're saying remote, right? Because I'm sitting in my house right now. I can remote into our control room right now. I can produce an entire game, assuming my internet holds, and no one would know the difference, but there is significant on-site equipment and on-site investment. And I think that's great. We did that a lot during COVID. I think that's important as a tool to have. The next step, of course, is production in the cloud, is spinning up a control room that lives somewhere on AWS and allows you to produce everything, get all the contribution feeds, and then do the backhaul and switch everything without any on-site presence. That exists now, right? There are many companies out there that allow you to do a full remote production, but it's really difficult in a sports world because latency and matching up sources and matching up graphics and times is really important. And then a return feed is very important, right? If I have a football show that I'm not doing on site and I need to put it on the video board and there's a 3-second delay between the game and the video board, well, that won't stand. The fans will go crazy. And so there are certain scenarios where I think we're very, very close to remote production, and I think it's definitely the future because you really don't want to invest so much money in one-time purchases for big equipment. But there are certain things where I don't know if we're quite there yet. I hope so.
Yeah, I know that to your point, a lot of times there are some things that we feel like, there could be 2 or 3 seconds there and no one's going to notice. And there's other things that we're trying to genlock everything to make sure that there's absolutely zero loss of latency, any kind of latency at all. So definitely. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, what has your experience been with augmenting your permanent staff with student workers? Do you draw from the communication/journalism department or from across the university as a whole?
Yes, no, and yes, if I try to remember everything in order. So we have a staff of 2 full-time people who report to me who are in charge of live broadcasting. And as you heard before, we have 350 games a year, and that is just not sustainable. And so we rely very heavily on student staff to help us do everything. Direct, run cameras, graphics, commentators, everything. We have about 100 students and recent graduates who do everything for us. Now, the no part of that question is Harvard does not have a communications department or a journalism school or a broadcasting team. Harvard as a university does not do that. And when Harvard students have free time, they go invest in the stock market, start a business. I don't know. They do really, really good, important things, but usually sports and productions are not part of them. Over my 12 years at Harvard, I've had thousands of students work for me. Harvard students, 3. I'm very, very lucky that I'm in Boston. And so we have students from all colleges around us, from Boston University to Boston College, Northeastern and Emerson and UMass, and everyone wants Harvard on their resume. And so it's been very easy for us to get students from all these other colleges. I know that's not an option for everyone, but we've been very lucky. We rely on students a lot.
That's incredible. Like it just so you have hundreds of, or at any given time you might have 100 students that are shooting. Is it about 100 students you said that are shooting there?
That's correct.
And they're all from other colleges.
Yes, which is why I was talking to someone about this. Whenever someone starts working with us, we have a pile of swag ready for them. Harvard polo shirts, Harvard sweatshirts, Harvard hat, Harvard, and it costs money, but it's important to get them to be Harvard supporters and feel like they're part of the family right away because they don't go to school here. And that's
and they now have a reason to wear the shirt. You can't really wear the shirt you can, but you can't really wear the shirt unless you've done something at the totally
that's right.
Makes sense. It's fantastic. Next question.
Next question is from Lenny Nelson in San Antonio. How do you integrate educational curriculum into productions?
Absolutely. That's a good question. So we hire people with a passion for sports. That's the vast majority of our people. Because if you don't know baseball, I can't teach you baseball. A, I don't have time for this. B, if you didn't grow up with it, it's going to be really, really challenging for you. So we hire you wanting you to be a sports fan. The rest we're going to teach you. That's our job. We're an educational institution. And so I'm going to teach you how to run camera and what all the buttons on the switcher do. And after I teach you, you're going to shadow some people who have been with us for a few years and see how they do it. And then you're going to be on comms during a game and hear the cadence and hear the expectation. And we're going to slowly get you to a level where we're comfortable with you actually operating things. So education is everything for us. When it comes to production, we hired back in the day. I would hire people who were into production and not into sports. And then we had a camera 3 operator for baseball one day, and I said, "Hey, point the camera at the pitcher." And she said, "Which one is that again?" And I said, "Oh boy, we're going to have a problem here." So we're focusing on sports now and less on production because we can teach that.
How long does it take from someone who wants to be a camera operator? How long does it take from them from zero, they get there, to actually operating a camera for one of the games?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the person. Some people have a knack for it, some people don't. We require at least 1 session of training, so that's 1 day, and at least 1 game of shadow. So in theory, after a couple of days, you can be ready, but we can tell really quickly if you are or you're not. And so we try to gradually back away.
And what are the key, like, so let's just say a camera operator as a good example. What are the things that you try to train them in very quickly to make them useful?
So number one is, and people always say camera, but number one is really tripod, right? Because a camera is a camera. But if you have a really, really good fluid tripod head that's set up properly, it's difficult to mess it up. The tripod will help you. But if you have no idea what you're doing and the tripod is bad and you're fighting it, then it doesn't matter how good the camera is. You'll have a nice 4K signal that goes jittery everywhere and you really can't follow the game. And so we spend a lot of time focusing on tripod setup. And then we say, listen, just breathe with the game. Think about watching this on TV. Go in, go out. Go right, go left. It's all about, right? Pan and tilt, in and out. And if people feel it, if people are into the game and they start watching it from their camera, you can tell that, if they're interested in seeing more, they're going to zoom in because they feel, oh, this is the right thing to do here. It's very easy with basketball or football. Some sports it's tricky, like how do you know to breathe in with a track meet? It's difficult to tell. But we try to get people who are track athletes or people who are into track or all these other sports. And then we show them examples. We're very big on examples. We bring them into our control room early and say, here are some productions that we've done or professionals have done. This is what it should look like. Here are some printouts so you can take with you to your camera. And that really seems to help.
That's amazing. Yeah. Next question.
Next question is from Eduardo Augustine in Panama City. For the remote booth, how do you configure this and stream to them with low latency?
So our remote booths are remote from the facility where the game is happening, but local to our control room. They are nearby. And so the control room itself is usually a small room with a green screen. We have two really, really big screen TVs on the wall, a counter with two commentator stations on Dante, so connected to our campus network. And then depending on the sport, a telestrator as well. Have a PTZ camera in front of them and a ring light around the PTZ camera. And latency is not really a problem. Dante is very, very low latency and it's really nearby. And a return feed as well. It's on NDI. And so, yes, there might be a few frames of delay, but that's not really a problem. It gets more complicated when we're doing a production where the sport itself is not happening on campus. So sailing was on a river. And we use live view packs for that. So those are bonded cellular packs. And we can set the latency. We usually set it around 1 second. And so there is a 1 second delay between reality and the feeds coming to us, but that's irrelevant for the commentators, right? They just see the feeds coming in, they add their commentary for the feeds they're seeing. And everybody at home sees it at the normal, whatever latency ESPN Plus has, plus 1 second. That's okay.
And these are LiveView 800s?
And we have 600s and 800s. The 600s are 1 input and 800 are 4 input.
4 inputs there. And what frame rate are you using mostly for your shows?
5994.
Yeah, that's great. And with the LiveView 800s, do you pack any location mics or anything else onto them to deliver those back with the LiveViews?
Yeah, we try to embed audio within video as much as possible. A, it helps because the audio is always in sync with the video. B, you don't have to send it separately. And so typically the way we do it is we set up ambient mics on top of our cameras, plug them into the cameras so that it's embedded within the SDI feed, and that's how it gets into LiveView as well. But yeah.
That's great. Next question.
Next question is from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. How have you been able to solve challenges to tell the story for some of your unprecedented coverages? Where do you derive inspiration? Have there been any recent innovations to aid in capturing and displaying data for the audience?
An excellent question. Storytelling is so important, right? Because some sports have a lot of downtime and you want to fill it with something besides the commentators talking about the weather. And B, this is our opportunity to tell the stories of these amazing student athletes. We have a captive audience and they're clearly interested in something. They're interested in either school or they're interested in the sport, and we should educate them on what makes this amazing. And so I have two teams reporting to me within Harvard. One is the broadcast team, which is what we've been talking about, but the other is the communications team. And their job, these are professional communicators, and their job is to get really familiar with our teams and write stories about them, find storylines, interview them, post on social media, create graphics for them. And so I have our commentators for every single broadcast check in with our communications team before the broadcast and the opposing teams get information, get storylines. If it's a big event, talk to the coaches, schedule time with the coaches the week before, and ask for ideas. Say, hey, I want to talk about your athletes. What can you do? What can you help me? Who's interesting? What's happening here? And then once the commentators have these storylines that they really want to talk about, they work with our broadcast directors and with our graphics ops to create graphics for it. Because what you always want is the magic of TV, which is the commentator saying something that seems completely unplanned, and then a lower third appearing that talks about the exact same thing. How did that happen? Obviously not magic, just pre-planning and IFB. And so we do that. We want to make sure that we have graphics for almost everything that the commentators are going to say that is not about the game itself. And then we want to make sure that there is a way for the commentators to cue it up or for the producer to call it up and say, okay, coming back from this next break, we're going to talk about so-and-so athletes, graphic, have ready with the slab, and commentators be ready, and cameras show this person. That's very, very common. We do it all the time, and it's very important. It shows that we had the foresight to plan and that this isn't a throwaway. It's something interesting.
Are the commentators also, are there students?
Students and recent graduates. Some graduated last year or two.
Do you ever have issues with people like they finish school but they still want to keep coming back and working on the teams?
Absolutely, 100%, and we love it. We're never going to kick someone away for wanting to continue to work with us.
I'm moving to Boston. I'm going to come hang out with you. All right, next question.
Rian Smith in Trinidad, West Indies asks, can you talk about the blackmagic setup for those smaller rooms?
Sure. So I'm guessing we mean tennis and squash here?
Yeah, I think that's what he was talking about, tennis and squash, your tennis and squash setup.
So they'd asked me before if I wanted to share any photos, and I think this is a good opportunity for that. So let me pull up a photo of our squash setup, and then I can show everyone. So just one moment. There we go. Okay, I will now share my screen. Okay, there we go. So this is the squash rack. So this is near the squash courts, and this is the rack we use to stream everything for squash. Let me zoom into it so I can talk everyone through it. Slightly out of focus. But at the top are 6 Blackmagic design ATEM switchers. These are an older version. That's the 1ME 4K. And each switcher gets one source that is a POV camera facing the squash court. The second source is an ambient mic dangling over the court. And a third source is an Intel compute stick. So that's basically just a little, like a flash drive, but it's a full Windows computer on it. And that goes to a web page that shows our scorebug. And we have the ATEM take the camera, take the second source, key it on, key out the green, and add the audio. So each of these produces basically the full show for each court. So these are 6 different courts. We don't do commentators. And then this is a slightly older picture, but then the output from each of these switchers goes to a streaming device. So currently you can see Teradek video units right under the switchers. And we have since changed them to Aja Hilo devices, which we have found to be easier and faster to manage. And so SDI feed into the Hilos streams online, and then we have some recorders down here to record the feeds. So that's the automated way. I think we can see the squash here, but I think there might be a photo there, some older photo. But there you go. So you can see all the different setups and everything. Tennis is very, very similar. I'll pull up a tennis photo. There we go. Tennis. There we go. So there we go. Here's a pretty recent photo of our rack. Let me zoom in. There we go. So same thing, ATEM switcher for each court, 6 courts again. Here are the Hilos, so Hilo for each court. And then we have a super old DVR unit so we can remote in and see the different camera feeds and everything like that. No commentators are, so we've had, let me stop sharing my screen so I can talk. So we had a detailed conversation with our coaches before we started this. And we said, listen, we can do a nice whip around show, like an NFL red zone thing. We'll go between the courts. We'll always show you the most important thing, and the commentators will talk about that. And they stopped me. They didn't even let me finish. They said, no. This isn't football. This is tennis or squash. These are parents watching or grandparents watching. And all they want is to watch their kid perform. And if you're cutting between them, we lose that. So we want every single court at all times. Even if they go out for lunch and you just show nothing for a little bit and then they come back, that's what we want. We don't care about the commentators. Ambient mic is fine. So that's what we do. And it's been huge. Everybody loves it because it shows everything at all times, and we get the footage later. And if we want to do a recap that's a little more whip around, we do that.
It's interesting. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway asks, what are the reasons that you have decided to standardize on JVC cameras? Are there any specific advantage or disadvantages for your use case?
So I like to find companies that want to work with us and are willing to listen to us. When we started working with JVC, their cameras were good, but I reached out to their sales rep and I said, listen, you know what would be great if the camera also did X, Y, and Z. And while I was speaking, he took out a notepad and started writing down what I was saying. And 2 years later, those features appeared in a camera. And I was hooked. I haven't gone back since because it has happened multiple times. I would go to them and say, amazing PTZ camera you just came up with. But, when you remote into it, it would be great if we could also record or start streaming or something. And they make it happen. And so having a company, a vendor that's willing to listen to you and make changes and develop something for the actual users versus what the engineers think the users should want is huge. And so JVC has proven itself, and we are loyal to them.
That's great. Next question.
Jeff Keithley from Texas and here on the panel asks, when are you planning to move some of your production to the virtual control room in the cloud?
I really, really want to try it. That's what I want. I want to try it. I want to find a sport that I want that's not a clock sport, let's say. It's something like fencing, or I guess wrestling has clocks, but something where there's no clock so that I don't have to worry about perfect sync, and I get nervous when things are weird. But this year is the year of trying it out, and if things go well, the next time we need to replace one of our TriCasters, maybe we don't. Maybe we say, hey, we're just going to do it in the cloud. But this is a big cloud year, and if you were at NAB, the NAB show in Vegas this year, you would have seen cloud production was everywhere. This is not a comment to Jeff, obviously. It's for the crowd.
Next question.
Next question's for me. What are your thoughts on high frame rates for sports, say 120 frame rates per second at 4K? Is that the future for that feels like you're there feeling?
It's not only the future, it's the present. We have lots of cameras that shoot in 4K and high frame rates, but it's mostly used for replays because the assumption is that either your device can't support it or the transmission method will be overwhelmed if we start pushing more than 60 frames per second. And so when we do replays, we always try to keep that in mind and use cameras that have high frame rates so that when we slow it down, it doesn't look weird and we have more frames to play with. We also have to think about, and this is something that I would never have imagined when I started this, think about compression based on what the screen shows. So thinking about a soccer game, it's fine. The field stays constant. The people are running around, not a problem. But you think about swimming and diving or water polo, which is the worst. Everything is moving at all times, right? The athletes are moving, the ball is moving, the water is moving. It's like when you see confetti at the end of the Super Bowl and suddenly all the compression algorithms go crazy. You have to send so much more data just to keep everything looking good. And so I'd be apprehensive about adding more frames there if all I'm trying to do is catch up with the frames I already have. And sometimes for water polo, we have to go down to 30 frames per second just to make sure that every frame actually looks good. So we're doing it now, but for replay.
Yeah, when we've done some tests with those, and we found that the slower frame rate feels more cinematic, 24 frames a second or whatever. But as we increase that frame rate, it becomes more and more visceral. You feel like you're there. And when we get above about 95 frames a second, we find at that 120 that it just feels like a window, and that's what a lot of us are thinking, somewhere in the future. I know that they tested at the Olympics, the last Olympics, And I worked on some tests previous to that. And for us, it was just like, oh, this is what we have to have. But to your point, incredible amounts of bandwidth. I mean, some of the feeds that that I was doing for the delivery for our test was 200 to 300 megs a second. Like it was just, like it was just an incredible amount of. Now those were 8K frames as well, so they were a lot of data, and that was still almost just barely enough to make the delivery. Have you guys thought about any immersive? Have you been looking at that at all?
We tried. There was a trend, what was it, like 2014, 2015, where everyone was trying 360 video. Yeah. And so we got a 360 camera. We actually recorded a rowing race.
Which one did you get?
Oh, I'd have to look it up. I don't remember, so long ago. It looked like a little tube with a 360 camera on top.
Yeah.
And so we recorded a whole race in 360, and then I took it into Premiere, which had a 360 mode, and I added 360 graphics, and I thought it was the coolest thing. And then we put it on YouTube's new 360 platform, and no one watched it. Because I said, we have the normal feed. Why would I want to go crazy here? So
it's a chicken or egg thing, like it's definitely something that, we did for me, the most impressive solution so far that I've seen was that I got to work on was we did a test at a golf at a PGA event, and in your immersive you had the 16:9, so it wasn't anything special in front of you, but it was clean. It was a clean feed, no graphics, and all the data was over on one side. So everything. So anytime you wanted to look, the same thing you were talking about earlier, you want all the data. You could sit there and watch the screen. You just look over here like this, and you'd see all the data there, and then you can have your social stuff, whatever you wanted to type over here, right? And so it was your personal stuff, the show, and then the data. And then when we got to certain holes, we had these ozos, so we were able to then what would happen is the whole thing would just wrap out, and you'd be standing on the green, or be standing on one of the tees, and you get to watch that for a second, and then you go back to whatever you wanted. And I was like, this is the only place to watch it for the 8 people that can do this. This is an amazing experience. Next question.
Walhus in Austin, Texas asks, what do you think of a sudden success of the WNBA and the technical infrastructure for game coverage and post-game press conferences?
I think it's great. I think that WNBA is taking off now is amazing, and it's something we've been trying to do with all our sports as well, making sure that whatever production we do for the men's side of the sport, we do the exact same thing for the women. I think it's the only way to do it, and the fact that it's happening in the pro world now is great. I think, and we've been trying to do this more, letting the athletes speak in their own voice is very important. And so whenever we can, we have sideline reporters do post-game or halftime walk-off interviews with student athletes and say, talk to us about what this has meant for you. Talk to us about the growth of the game. Talk to us about why you're here or how you got here. And adding that personality, I think, helps the student athletes feel more comfortable and also helps grow the sport, right? You want to root for specific people. And if it's not a team you're necessarily very familiar with, if you hear from the student athletes themselves, you're more likely to tune in later and say, oh, I like so-and-so. I want to watch her play.
Absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, have you thought of adding immersive elements, 4K HDR, AR, XR overlays, etc., to your coverage?
Yeah, so we just talked about that. I think we're looking into it. We want to see how immersive video continues.
Well, and beyond immersive, I think he's talking also about HDR. Have you been playing it all with high dynamic range? I think they NDI6 just started supporting it.
I was just gonna say that. That's great. I think so. NDI6, which is the newest version of NDI, just started supporting HDR. So that's next on our list. I think because some of our venues, as we say, are more historic, having high dynamic range would really help when lighting is limited, so that you can see a lot more detail. And so it's very high on our list, finding the cameras that can support it for us, and then the transmission method. But yeah, I think it's here.
That's great. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA asks, how do you manage onboarding new production help, bringing them up to speed with procedures and best practices of your productions, documentation, shadowing trainers, watching film, etc.?
Yeah. So we briefly mentioned this before, but when we hire people all the time, and the thing about working with students is On the one hand, they're amazing. Students bring such an energy and such an excitement and a passion. And when a student stops me and says, have you ever tried this? Or would you like to try this? New ideas and innovation are amazing. And working with young people is great. But they're students. So sometimes they go for study abroad, or they graduate, God forbid, or they get another job or something. And so we're constantly hiring. And we have to have a method by which we constantly bring people up to speed. And so the way we do it is, number one is with training. We schedule afternoon or evening or weekend training with people and say, okay, here's a camera, no pressure, no game, nothing. Here's how you build a tripod. Here's how you set up a camera. Here's what all the buttons do. Same with switcher, replay, or graphics. Next step is shadowing. Stand next to this camera operator during a game and see what they do. They'll show you how to build the camera live. Get on comms, hear the directions so you can get a sense of what the cadence is and what the director sounds like. After that, we let them try it on their own. We say, okay, well, here, you still have someone professional next to you, but maybe for this quarter, you try it. And then really quickly, we can tell if they're ready or not. We also have examples of past games, and we have documentation. So we've worked with our partners at ESPN to have screenshots or photos of what a production should look like. Here's the right zoom level. Here's how you frame it. Here's what the graphics are. The thing we've discovered a lot is that if you don't have a return feed, or if you're not using your return feed, camera operators have no idea where the score bug is and how big it is. And so they frame things funny, especially young camera operators. And so we constantly remind them, or we show them a return feed, or we give them screenshots and say, for hockey, the score bug is at the top, but for football, it's on the bottom. And there's a reason, right? The action is at the top or the action is on the bottom. But keep that in mind for your framing. You really don't want to cut things off. And so we try to provide them with as much information, and then obviously as many reps as possible. The more you do it, the better you are.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, when do you cover a sport with a single high-resolution wide-angle shot versus coverage with multiple angles?
It depends on the sport. It depends on the staffing available. Depends on the resources. Those busy fall weekends where we have 15 games a weekend, we have to prioritize. But we also have to think about it, right? Think about a pool with a swim meet, and it's preliminaries, so it's not like a big final or something, and you have a wide camera showing all the lanes. You have really detailed data-driven graphics that show you split times and names and everything, and you have commentators speaking. Is it really important that the camera move back and forth? Probably not. You can see everything. You know what's going on. It's really not that important, especially with really long races. Same with a long race in a track meet or something like that. But you think about a football game, well, that's tricky, right? The line of scrimmage moves all the time. The field is really large. You can do it, but it's not great. A lot of people do it for baseball and softball. You have a camera high home. Again, I think that's fine, especially if it's an unobstructed view. So when I started doing this, my mantra was always, if you can't do it right, don't do it at all. And by right, I mean multiple cameras and cut between them and do like what you would imagine a big production to be. And then we did a survey. We did a survey at the end of the year. This was like 2013. And we asked all our fans, because we had all their information, we said, what would you rather? Have one really great production, but then 2 games don't get to be produced, or produce every single game and do what we can, even if it's just one camera and graphics? And 100, I've never seen this before, 100% of the people responded, just put it live. I don't care what it, just make it live, because we want to see our kids competing, our family members competing, or just the sport. And so we've adjusted accordingly. If it's happening, it will be streamed live. And if one camera is what we have and it can still tell the story, like fencing, as long as you show the whole strip, and that's really fine. That's not a problem.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. How do you handle relations with Harvard IT? Do you control your own network infrastructure for Dante and NDI, or do you rely on central campus IT?
An excellent question. And my question in return is, how many hours do we have left in this? Because I can go on forever and ever. So it's incredibly important to have a good relationship with your IT team this year, right? Because, or this time, because we used to have broadcast engineers and we used to have IT engineers, and they would rarely overlap. And the Venn diagram now is basically just a full overlap, right? If you're a broadcast engineer, you also need to know IT. And if you're an IT engineer in this space, you need to know broadcast, because everything is IT. And so having a good relationship with them is very important. And we have that at Harvard. We explain to them what we're doing, what the expectations are in terms of bandwidth, what ports need to be open, how VLANs and subnets really affect what we do. And then we sit down and plan a network. We are 100% on the Harvard network. We're on the Harvard campus network, but we have our own VLAN. So that, because we didn't initially, when I started here, we were on the greater athletics VLAN, and so there were machines at the gym, like treadmills, on the same VLAN as us, creating all kinds of multicast traffic that was interfering with our PTZ cameras, and no one could figure it out until we started shutting things down. And so we have our own VLAN. Currently, NDI and Dante and Control are all on the same VLAN, and it's been okay. We've configured it so that everything works together. It limits how many things we have to think about in terms of separating NICs. But at some point, we might have to split them up, which would be fine, having a VLAN for Dante, a VLAN for NDI, and a VLAN for Control. We also started out on Cisco 1 gig switches, which is the Harvard standard, and that's fine if you don't have NDI. Once you start introducing NDI, 1 gig gets eaten up really, really quickly. And so we have since moved to 10 gig Aruba switches, which has provided a lot more headroom there. And we're looking into 25 gig switches in the future. And that was a big surprise for our IT team. They didn't realize the amount of traffic we're going to have. And once they figured it out, and once we showed them results, I love sending people results. I send them video clips, and I say, this is thanks to you. We got all these cameras from our baseball field because you helped us with bandwidth. And it's eye-opening for them because all they see is bandwidth utilization charts. That's what's in front of them. And if I actually show them the broadcast on ESPN, it clicks. So, okay, I understand now, and I want to help you more. And I'm going to go beyond this camera just a little bit, beyond this question, I'm sorry. Sending everyone screenshots. We had our softball field used to have a terrible backstop net. It was like a chain link fence. You couldn't shoot through it. It was awful. All you could see is just a chain link. And our facilities team replaced it with super, super thin netting where there was no poles. It was all suspension based. And now you can't see it. You just shoot through it and it's completely transparent. And I sent him a screenshot. I said, here is what softball used to look like. Chain link getting in the face. And now you can't see it. And that's what this investment has meant for us and our fans. And it was eye-opening for them. So I think saying thank you and showing examples is very important.
Next question.
Next question comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What has been the greatest failure you learned the most from?
We fail all the time. I get this question all the time because I'm a big poster on Twitter/X, and I just post our successes, right? Look at this amazing sailing broadcast. But you know how many times we tried it before and it completely failed? We fail all the time, and that's great. That's not a problem. I take pride in that. Rowing broadcasts have been such a pain for us because we tried to initially do rowing broadcasts on a boat, camera on a boat with a cable into a laptop, streaming from the boat. There's nothing remote about it with the commentator sitting right next to us. Well, you know what? When you go under a bridge, suddenly cell signal, not so great when you use one antenna. And then we tried to do point to point. We would have a Teradek transmitter, a Teradek bolt on a camera, on a boat, and then transmitting back to the shore. Well, you know what? When there's a tree in the way or a leaf passes by, suddenly point to point is not so great. And that's when we started using live view and bonded cellular. So we fail all the time. We have tons of footage of all our productions looking horrible. And what I tell my team all the time is it's not about how many times you fail. It's about what you learn from it. We're all human. We're allowed to make mistakes. What you're not allowed to do is make the same mistake twice. You have to learn, and there are plenty of new mistakes to make. That's no problem. I fail as much as anyone else.
Next question.
Next question comes from David Brady in New York City. How often are your looks and assets updated and reviewed? For our sports division, it is annual.
So it depends. ESPN, we do the ESPN looks and assets, and they don't change often. But they are graphics, and especially insert graphics, are developed throughout the year to support special scenarios. So if there's a big tournament coming up and you need a bracket graphic or something like that, those get added throughout the year. But typically, no. Typically, our broadcasts look and feel the same at the beginning of the year as they do at the end of the year. But then at the end of the year, we take a chance and we take the opportunity and we work with ESPN to try to figure out what worked and what hasn't. ESPN, for those watching, know that initially ESPN, probably up to 10 years ago, had the same look and feel for all their broadcasts. There was this bar at the bottom that had this very metallic kind of look, and that's what they used for everything. And then they changed it to this flatter look now, and they started pulling sports out. Football, college football has its own graphics package. College basketball, its own. This year, college lacrosse. 2 years ago, college lacrosse got its own. 2 years ago, college baseball, softball got their own. And so ESPN has been evolving how look and feel, especially within the graphics world, appears, and we just follow their lead, and I think it's very important. The more that you have your graphics match up with the sport and the story you're trying to tell, the better the story is going to be. So every year, to answer the actual question.
Next question.
Rion Smith in Trinidad, West Indies asks, ever thought of packaging those training documents for smaller productions to learn, example ESPN, examples of shots, where bugs will be on screen, etc.? Harvard Biz School creates learning courses. Why couldn't the production team?
We do. We do have that. We have examples, and they're not courses, but they're like packets of paper we can print for people, and they show all the examples of everything. Here's the thing. I don't trust anyone to learn it themselves, right? It's like homework. Say, oh, here is 20 pages. Read it before you come to work. Did they read it? Did they not read it? I don't know. I like to have them there in the control room, sitting in a chair saying, here, let me show you examples. And also ask your questions right now. Don't look at it as homework. Look at it as an interactive experience. I think that's how people learn better. But then we always send them home with something. We say, here is the ESPN, because ESPN has presentations. ESPN has a really big PDF with explanations of how they like to produce every single sport at the college level, where cameras should go, what framing should look like. It's all written down. But that can't be the first step. That can be, okay, well, now that you've learned everything in person, here's what you can refer back to if you don't remember. I think that's the better way to do it. And the Harvard Business School does something similar as well, right? It's not on your own. It's, here's a case study, read it, then we'll talk about it in class and learn things together, and then you can keep it later on for long-term learning.
Imry, thank you so much for your time. Such a pleasure to have you here. Incredible hour. So it was really, really good to have you. I hopefully we'll get you back sometime, have you join. I do think that what was pointed out there is, man, you have so much knowledge about every single sport. It feels like we want to bring you back in and just talk about each sport. Like, how do we do this? But anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to the panelists for all their great questions and all the great answers in the first hour, and being part of this. We can't do this without you. Thanks to the incredible team. There is a small village every day that gets up and develops the tools that we use for this show, runs those tools for this show, manages who's going to be on, figures out all those bits and pieces, and we really appreciate everybody's contribution. And finally, thanks to the producers who ask all the questions and keep this going. It's a really short show without your help of asking the questions and keeping the conversation going. We appreciate it. If we had to travel all over the world to ask these questions from person to person to person, we would have traveled 58,000 miles today. That is 93,000 kilometers, and that is 460 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. There's a whole series, I think, that I'm going to ping you about. We should do every sport. We should just do like a little 3-minute video on every sport of just like, this is the way to cover the sport. This is the way we cover the sport. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's great. This was a lot of fun. Talking about technical things is what I like to do, and usually I have to calibrate because people
there's no calibration
tolerate
here.
it. But this was wonderful.
Yeah.
No need here. Great having you here, Imry. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you, Jeff.
Yeah, really, really great to have you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. See you later.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks.